What's good? It's Woog. I'm going to get into this Gervonta Davis versus Lamont Roach undercard. And as lopsided as the odds are on Tank Davis versus Lamont Roach, let me just tell you, Tank Davis last time I checked was like a minus 1,600. Lamont Roach was like a plus 1,000. So that means Tank is a 16-1 favorite. Ridiculous, right? But this undercard features two fights that are actually dead even. And I actually want to cover both of these in this one video. And the reason I want to do this is because this is all taking place at the 140-pound division. These are all 140 fighters, and this is two title fights at 140. We've got Jose Rayo Valenzuela, 14 wins and 2 losses, defending his WBA title against Gary Antuanne Russell, 17 wins and 1 loss. That 1 loss just came against Alberto Puello, who's going to be fighting on this card, 23 wins and 0 losses, and Puello is going to be defending his WBC 140-pound title against Sandor Martin, 42 wins and 3 losses. That last loss was against Teofimo Lopez in a fight that a lot of people thought Sandor Martin should have gotten the W on. So again, this is 2 title fights, and the thing that is so interesting is that the odds on these fights are like identical. They are both, according to Odds Checker, minus 110 and plus 110. That's as even as you could get in boxing. So on the Valenzuela versus Antuanne Russell side, it's actually Russell who's a super slight, barely there. It's basically dead even, but Antuanne Russell is minus 110. Valenzuela is plus 110, and then with Puello versus Sandor Martin, Puello's a minus 110, Sandor Martin is plus 110. I don't know when the last time, I mean, I know we just got this crazy Riyadh season card with a bunch of nearly pick'em fights, but this is very unusual. I love these 2 undercard fights. Now, stylistically, one fight is more attractive than the other. Valenzuela versus Gary Antuanne Russell, they are both punchers. They both have high knockout percentages, whereas Alberto Puello and Sandor Martin, you can't pay certain people to watch these guys fight, especially Sandor Martin. He's known to have like a very negative style, but I mean, I see him as just being very, very effective. He's got good reflexes. He's pretty quick on his, when he does explode into punches and combinations, but very different styles between these 2 fights. So like the one with a little more or a lot more sizzle on it is Rayo Valenzuela versus Gary Antuanne Russell. I kind of think somebody's going to get hurt there. And another thing that's super interesting about these 2 undercard fights, all 4 fighters are southpaws. So you've got southpaw versus southpaw and another southpaw versus southpaw. So this is pretty wild. And another thing that's interesting about this is both Rayo Valenzuela and his opponent, Gary Antuanne Russell, lost the last time they fought a southpaw. So Rayo Valenzuela got stopped by Edwin De Los Santos, who, by the way, still hasn't fought since that awful fight against Shakur Stevenson. We still haven't seen Edwin De Los Santos back in the ring. But Valenzuela, lost the last time he fought a southpaw in De Los Santos, and Gary Antuanne Russell just fought a southpaw in Alberto Puello, who beat him via split decision. Now with Puello versus Russell, when Russell started that fight off, he started off winning probably the first 3 or 4 rounds. I know on Joe Goossen's scorecard, unofficial scorecard, he had Gary Antuanne Russell, I think, winning the first 4 rounds. But Alberto Puello, you saw what he was doing. He was kind of moving Russell around. He was blocking and avoiding a lot of Gary Antuanne Russell's shots. He was jabbing to the body. He was catching it with nice, clean left-hand counters and with lead right-hand counters. And he basically just outskilled him over time. Basically from the 5th round on, the things that normally work for Gary Antuanne Russell, kind of his measured aggression, sometimes a little less measured aggression. I mean, Gary Antuanne Russell's first 17 fights, basically every fight before this loss to Puello, he knocked his opponent out. So he was 17-0 with 17 KOs. The only 2 ranked guys who could say that at the time were Artur Beterbiev and Virgil Ortiz Jr., at least at the time of Gary Antuanne Russell versus Alberto Puello. But yeah, Puello basically had a really good showing, and he turned things around after that 4th round. Now, Gary Antuanne Russell style-wise, don't get him confused with Gary Russell Jr. Gary Russell Jr., I still say to this day, is one of the fastest-handed fighters I have ever seen. In fact, I don't think there is a fighter in the sport today with faster hands than Gary Russell Jr. Let me know if you think different, but there was just something special about Gary Russell Jr. And it's just a damn shame that, look, put it like this. I look at Gary Russell Jr. as having been a Hall of Fame talent who just didn't have enough fights to matter. Even though he was a WBC 126 featherweight belt holder for like a few years, several title defenses, but they were at best against King Tug Nyambiar and Jojo Diaz. Those were Gary Russell Jr.'s two best title defenses. His best win was probably against Johnny Gonzalez when he won the belt. But yeah, he has so many meaningless fights in between against guys where it's like, oh, this just feels like a waste of time. Why are you wasting your prime just picking up that one check, making that one defense, and just keeping things moving? I mean, you could get the business reason in doing so, but it just seemed like a huge missed opportunity. He didn't fight Carl Frampton, didn't fight Leo Santa Cruz, and this wasn't really his fault. He was trying to get these fights, but it takes two to tango. I just wish that there were more of the powers that be, like Turki Al-Sheikh today, who could have made a more meaningful Gary Russell Jr. fights happen. But again, Gary Russell Jr., one of the fastest handed fighters I have ever seen. Gary Antuanne Russell isn't that. He's bigger, he hits harder per punch, he's more aggressive, although I wouldn't say that Gary Antuanne Russell is a better all-around boxer or fighter than Gary Russell Jr. Again, I look at Gary Russell Jr. as being a Hall of Fame talent. I wasn't sure that Gary Antuanne Russell was going to beat Rances Barthélemy. He got dropped against Barthélemy. Then he dropped Barthélemy a couple rounds later, and then they stopped the fight, which I thought was premature. Barthélemy at the time felt very much in the fight, and I didn't think he reacted to getting dropped terribly enough to where it warranted a stoppage. I would say besides that win against Barthélemy, Gary Antuanne Russell's most meaningful win would probably be against an over-the-hill Victor Postol. Like, I don't think Gary Antuanne Russell would have done to a prime Victor Postol. He stopped Postol. I think he was the first to ever stop Victor Postol. I think it would have been a much different fight if Postol was, the Postol that stopped Lucas Matisse, or even the Postol that lost a little bit down the line to Terrence Crawford or Josh Taylor. Victor Postol was a really good fighter, but yeah, name-wise, that did a lot for Gary Antuanne Russell. So here he finds himself in a title challenge against Jose Valenzuela. Again, both of these guys are dangerous. And Jose Valenzuela, he was pretty much a knockout artist, still is. I mean, look at what he did to Chris Colbert at the end of 2023 in their rematch. One of Valenzuela's two losses, remember, he got stopped unexpectedly by Edwin De Los Santos. I mean, Valenzuela was the A-side guy. He was supposed to win that fight. He got stopped by De Los Santos. Then he lost a controversial decision to Chris Colbert, who got dropped like mercilessly a couple times in that fight. And Chris Colbert wins a unanimous decision. I remember a lot of people were pissed after that decision was read. I mean, Jose Valenzuela was visibly crying after the fight, and him and Chris Colbert were like talking trash. Now, it seems and it felt after the fight like Valenzuela deserved the win. But when you really look at things like round by round, sometimes if you really look at it round by round, where Chris Colbert might be scoring enough points, touching him up here, touching him up there, playing pretty good overall defense. But then when Valenzuela hits him, he knocks him cross-eyed, right? Chris Colbert's either in big trouble or he goes down. Well, if there were only like 2 or 3 instances of that type of damage, and Chris Colbert was otherwise doing pretty well in the boxing realm, well then, because you score it round by round, you can have a situation where the guy who wins on the scorecards round by round isn't the guy who you feel should have won the fight, just looking at the fight in its totality and then saying, well, who do you think should have won the fight, right? It's almost like the Devin Haney versus Ryan Garcia thing. Devin Haney got knocked down a few times, but that fight was still razor close because of the rounds that Devin Haney was otherwise winning. So we got some of that. Now, it was interesting that it was a unanimous decision. I was surprised by that, but I didn't think it was a total robbery. I get that many people differ in that opinion, but that's at least how I would explain how that happened, because you're supposed to be looking at every single round in a vacuum. You don't have carryover points. Like if you get knocked down the round before, you're not supposed to even consider that in the next round that you're scoring. So yeah, Chris Colbert won the first one. He didn't get away with anything in the second one, though. He got knocked out devastatingly in the 6th round, to where he was coming in. He wasn't really listening to his corner. And Chris Colbert, by the way, has lost again since this. devastating knockout at the hands of Valenzuela. Quite frankly, I don't know where Chris Colbert goes career-wise beyond this point. It's not looking good. Now he's like getting stopped by even lower level guys than Valenzuela. But in that rematch, Chris Colbert was moving forward. He had gotten buzzed like early in the fight. And really a few of those rounds, like for as long as the fight was going on, you got a feeling that this was a matter of survival for Chris Colbert. Like, yes, he might have been doing some good work in a few moments, but every time he got hit, he would be back to holding, back to, being on the ropes on wobbly legs. This was not going well for him. And it ended even worse than it was going in those previous rounds. Like, the whole fight was pretty bad for Chris Colbert. And the finishing touch, that last punch that sent Chris Colbert down to where he landed on the bottom rope, like from like here, like the chest or the neck, like this area was laying face first on the rope. And he was out cold, silent for a while. They had to roll him over. He was unconscious. Scary moment. I think it was like on a David Morrell undercard in Minnesota. But yeah, that's what being on the wrong end of Jose Valenzuela's power, that's where it could land you. And Valenzuela gave us something different in his next fight against Pitbull Cruz. He was definitely a live dog in that one, but most people thought Pitbull was going to win. I was at that fight. That was on the Terrence Crawford versus Madrimov fight in LA, the Riyadh season, Los Angeles. But there were more Pitbull Cruz fans in the house than anybody else. When you look at the people selling merch outside of the stadium, outside of the venue, there were more Pitbull Cruz shirts than Terrence Crawford versus Madrimov main event shirts, than Eminem shirts. Eminem was a performer during that event. People loved Pitbull Cruz and they were out to see him largely. But Valenzuela kind of spoiled the party there, defeating Pitbull Cruz via split decision to win the WBA 140 belt. So who do I think is going to win between Valenzuela, who again showed different back foot style wrinkles in that fight against Pitbull, versus Gary Antuanne Russell? Well, I wanted to go Valenzuela here, and he still can hurt Gary Antuanne Russell. But I don't know if he's going to fight as disciplined a fight as he did against Pitbull Cruz. I think this is going to be a firefight between the two at a point, and either one of these guys can hurt the other. But I just believe in the parity right now in the shape of things at 140. I just don't see anybody holding it down with all of these, this guy beats this guy, then this guy beats this guy. I think that that's going to continue. And I actually think that Gary Antuanne Russell is going to beat Jose Valenzuela. I think he's going to stop Valenzuela. I think Valenzuela is going to have his moments. I think he might buzz and even hurt Gary Antuanne Russell early. I think he might even drop him. But I think that Gary Antuanne Russell is going to eventually break Valenzuela down. And I think he's going to stop Valenzuela. I mean, Valenzuela hurt Edwin De Los Santos. I think he dropped him before Edwin De Los Santos immediately dropped Valenzuela immediately after that and then stopped him in the third round. So Valenzuela, I think, is going to have his moments where it's looking like, oh, shoot, is Gary Antuanne Russell in trouble? But something tells me that Gary Antuanne Russell is going to go to Valenzuela's body and that he's going to eventually stop Jose Valenzuela. So yeah, I'm going to go with Gary Antuanne Russell to kind of, I would say upset, but again, these are dead even odds. But I think that Gary Antuanne Russell is going to be the next WBA 140-pound title holder. And then with Puello versus Sandor Martin, I think Puello's going to once again do just enough to edge a decision in the way that he did against Batir Akhmedov, in the way that he did against Gary Antuanne Russell. I think this is going to be, it's not going to be as boring as you might think. Sometimes I think that when you get two stylists, and these are both, again, southpaw, back foot style stylists, it can't be as boring as it seems like it's going to be on paper, right? It can't be that much of a defensive minded. I mean, Puello starts to sell out on a lot of his punches. He doesn't have devastating power, but he does sit on his punches. Sandor Martin dropped Teofimo Lopez, and he totally outboxed. And this was like the upset, one of the upsets of the year when he upset Mikey Garcia. That's how Sandor Martin made his name. But there's a reason why Mikey Garcia wasn't able to just rush in there. Sandor Martin was throwing something back. Yes, he does move a lot, but when he sets, he fires. So I think that there's going to be more fireworks than you might expect in Puello versus Sandor Martin, but I'm going to go with Alberto Puello to retain his WBC 140-pound title via split decision. I'm going to go majority decision, split decision, something like that. And yeah, it's going to look like, damn, Sandor Martin just missed it again. Now that would be crazy if we get this much parity where we get two new 140-pound champions on the same night, right? But it's very possible. I think that Puello versus Sandor Martin will be really close. And again, I think that Valenzuela versus Russell is going to, somebody might get hurt, and I think that this one is going to result in a stoppage. In this case, my pick is Russell stopping Valenzuela. and then Puello split decision winning over Santa Martin. Yo, one more thing about Puello, by the way, that I forgot to mention is that Puello is actually now a 2-time 140-pound belt holder. When he beat Batir Akhmedov, he won a share of the title. He won the WBA title. He then tested positive for PED, so he faced a suspension, was stripped of the title, returned, won one lower level fight, and then he fought Gary Antuanne Russell for the vacant interim WBC champ. So he is now full WBC champ, and I think Devin Haney has been switched to champion in recess by the WBC. They have some of the wackier titles. Remember, they've got like emeritus for certain fighters, and you know, it's just a little bit confusing. But Alberto Puello being elevated to full WBC champ makes him a 2-time 140-pound champion and one with a PED history, according to that failed test. So yeah, something to consider. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this undercard. Let me know your thoughts on the state of the 140 division. You got Teofimo Lopez. I don't know if Devin Haney or Ryan Garcia will ever come back to 140. They're both fighting their next fights at 147, as is Jose Ramirez. So I don't know if Ramirez is going to ever come back to 140, but you've got some really interesting names. I mean, the IBF champion is Richardson Hitchens. You've got Sabril Matias. You've got a lot of guys. I mean, Josh Taylor just moved up to 147, so I don't think he's going to fight at 140 again. But then you've got Jack Catterall. You've got Arnold Barboza, who just won a close decision over Catterall. A lot of names at 140. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.